Family. We all have one. Maybe your family looks like this. Maybe your dad reminds you of this. And you like to have fun like this. Oh, and it seems like every family has someone who reminds us of him. No matter what your family looks like, we all know that our family matters. Last week, we talked about God's ideal plan for our family life. We all know achieving the ideal isn't easy. All of us fall short, but Jesus says that's okay. You aren't condemned. Whether you're starting a family, raising a family, or wondering if family's even worth the effort, this series will provide direction and hope for you and the most important people in your life.
Good afternoon. I am so glad that you made Heritage Church part of your weekend today. Before we get going, I wanted to let you know, my name's Chris. I'm our family ministries pastor here. I wanted to take a quick moment. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, and so we wanted to take a moment to honor anyone who is a veteran. So if you don't mind, if you've ever served in our armed services, would you mind standing so we could honor you? If there's anyone in the room. Thank you. You can be seated. Thank you so much. Thank you for your service, and thank you for participating in that with us. And we're jumping into this next part of our Family Matters series, and I love, seeing the shows and the roll-in, just thinking about family dynamics. I love learning about different families and different upbringings and that bring about different ways about going about things. I love learning about different families until people start learning a little bit about me and my family. I feel a little protective, and I'm not so excited about people learning about family dynamics when it comes to mine. And I have a little bit of reason to be nervous about talking about this right now. This week is parent-teacher conferences. And for any of you that are a parent, you got kids in school, you remember this. For some of you, it might be a great time. For some of us, I have no idea what my kids are saying at school all day long. And so they're doing great, but I have no idea. And the reason I'm a little nervous this week is because in the past, we've had some things come up. So one of my girls last year for preschool, we found out they were learning about family, talking about family. And when they were asked about it, when Amber was asked about it, she said that when it came to Mama makes meals for them. Mama takes care of them. Mama helps Big Sister with their homework. Mama is a superhero, which she is, absolutely. So when it came to what she said, the rest of our family, I'm like, all right. Like, Daddy, takes you to dance every week, wears that Dance Dad badge proudly. I do so much, I'm waiting for it. I'm so ready for her to just tell me about all the things that Amber says about me. She said two things. The first thing that Amber said about me was, Daddy toots a lot. That's a fun conversation with the teacher at that point. Dairy, am I right? Where do you go from there? And so that was one thing. Mama, by the way, was winning awards over here, and rightfully so. And then Daddy toots a lot, and then one time Daddy took his coffee in the shower with him. That's what you have to say? That's kind of a... And so I'm a little nervous this week to see what my girls are saying at school. I'm just not sure what's going to come of it. And it's very interesting. I even furthered that perception of our family, too. Last week was Halloween, and we had one of our girls forgot something at school. Very sweet. One of the teachers dropped it off to our house. And then my wife answered the door. And remind you, it's Halloween. But also, I'll remind you that no one else in the house was dressed up yet. No one was dressed up yet. It was early on in the game. And so they asked me to come to the door, and I walk over in an inflatable shark costume, and the teacher was like, oh. And I was like, this just answered every question they have about my kids. Why is Evie doing that? Oh, do you know their dad answered the door in a shark costume? Yeah, okay, that might explain a few. So I'm a little nervous for this week, but I love learning about it, and I'll say this, I love being a dad. I want to be a great dad. I want to be a great husband. I think all of us would probably say we want to be great. We want to be known. We want to make an impact, but oftentimes we find it hardest. I'm making kind of an assumption here, but I think for me and a lot of people I know, we find it hardest to make the greatest impact in our own home. It's just we understand in the work field what it looks like to maybe climb the ladder, get recognition, be known, do great, make an impact. But then at home is where there's a lot of complexities. There's a lot of layers to it, and it becomes a little bit more complicated than we'd like it to be. And oftentimes we find it maybe hardest to make a greater impact at home. And so today, what if we could talk about taking a few positive steps towards making a greater impact at home? I think we would all say, yeah, I'm willing to take those steps. Again, I'm making an assumption here, but that's what we're going to talk about, because so often we have this idea that I got to gain more, I got to do more, I got to do all of this, and I got to power up. And what if we flipped the script and took a different approach and decided, you know what, let's maybe power down and approach this in a slightly different way. And so we're going to look at kind of a definition of love as we get going here. And if you've been to weddings, you've heard the verses. If you haven't been to weddings, you probably have heard the verses before in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're going to look at a picture of what love looks like. And I think for all of us, if we were to say, we may not cite these verses, but all the things that come up in this passage, we would probably all say, yeah, I would love to be known for these things, especially with my family, especially for people that are closest to me. I would love to be able to say, those are my characteristics. That is me. And so with that in mind, let's go in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Love is patient. Let's stop. So we all want these things to be true of us, but let's get into it. In my head right now, all I'm hearing is that Family Feud buzzer that just went off a couple times. Like, love is patient. Wrong. Love is kind. Wrong. Chris is patient. Right? If you were to ask me at my wedding, which I'm pretty sure this passage was read at my wedding, but if you were to ask me when I got married almost 10 years ago, if I were to personify, if I was going to embody all of these things and so much more in my marriage, I would have said, absolutely, I will. I'm going to be all of this and more. And then you could read this passage and be like, love is patient. And my brother, who was my best man, would have been like, Chris is patient? Yeah, I've lived with him a long time. Good luck with that, Erica. Like, it's just like we want this to be true of us, but oftentimes maybe it's not the case. So let's just read this, just kind of humor us for a moment, if anything, and read this. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. Love never loses faith. Love is always hopeful and endures through every circumstance. What is so interesting about this is when Paul wrote this to his letter to the Corinthians, it wasn't broken down by chapter and verse. He wasn't saying, chapter 13 and these verses. He was just writing a letter. And then later on, we kind of made ways for us to find it easier to understand. And so we broke that down. So when Paul's writing this, if you look at it, it's interesting where he puts this. Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he's talking about gifts that we have been given and how we can serve and use them to benefit people around us. And then he jumps into the very first part of chapter 13 where it says, but if I'm doing all these things without love, you may have heard that verse before too. It's like I'm a resounding gong. Like it's just kind of, it's worthless. If I can do all these things, but I don't have love, it's not really meaningful, is it? And then he goes in to give us a picture of what love looks like. And then he jumps into chapter 14 that furthers some specific gifts on how we can use those to serve and benefit people around us. So I love that he kind of takes this break to just say, hey, by the way, this isn't just all about the things that we have to offer. It's about our approach within it. This is a snapshot of what love looks like. But before he goes into talking about the verses again, I love that he includes this in it. He says, when I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now is not the time to point or nudge or do anything like that. But how many of you know that growing older doesn't always equate to growing up? We just know it to be true. Growing older doesn't always equate to growing up. And I remember watching one of my favorite shows. I think I was a teenager at the time. And I'm sorry if you're offended by this, but I'm not that sorry. And so I watched a show called Whose Line Is It Anyway? It was very funny to me. And so they would do these things. It was kind of improv comedy. And so they would have a couple of actors, actresses up, and they would pull things. One of my favorite games was Scenes from a Hat. So they pull a scene out of a hat. It was written on paper, and then the people had to come forward and act it out. And one of those was, what if adults behaved as children in adult settings? And so Wayne Brady, who doesn't love Wayne Brady? He comes forward and someone else comes forward. They pretend to be in like a little workplace dispute, and they just start shoving each other like they're two kids on recess. And it was funny to me. And then I grew older and I was like, this is too real. This is too real. We grow older, but maybe we don't grow up. Another one, a situation was that they acted out was I think it was a breakup situation, and one person threw himself on the ground and was wailing and crying, and I was like, this is too real. Growing older doesn't always equate growing up, and I think it's fair to say that growing up, as we're younger, we have a different definition or a different snapshot of what love looks like. We have, and how many of you know that relationships don't always work out the way they do on TV? It doesn't always look that way. But as kids, we kind of have this fairy tale idea of what love is going to be, and all the things that we're maybe subconsciously taking note of, that I won't do that, and I'm going to do this, and it's going to be perfect, and it's going to be lived out this way. And even, my daughter, my second daughter in kindergarten this year, she had a boy on the playground. I don't know if he said, "I love you," but something dangerously close. And then he said, "Amber, I want to marry you." And she told us that, and I was like, okay, who's the kid? Like, what? Who are we calling? Where are we going? We said, "Amber, what did you say back?" And she said, "Oh, I want to marry you too." I was like, nope, don't like that. Nope, go to your room and never leave. And so, but we have this idea, like, they were talking about a wedding, and we have this idea of what love looks like, but we all know that in order for relationships or families to work, it really does take work. It looks a lot different. So this idea of putting childish things behind us and not bringing those to us, having an aim, having a target that we're aiming for. It takes us, I say this at a lot of weddings that I have the opportunities to officiate, it takes being intentional. It takes an intentional target in saying, I want to go this direction, and that includes stripping off some of these things from childhood. I reasoned like a child when I was a child. I don't do that, and I have an aim towards something different now. And so in order to kind of understand how do we unpackage this, how do we have this play out in our world, there's a couple of things that I feel like love gives us a picture of within these verses. The first couple of things are that love is very sincere. Love is sincere, it is sacrificial, and it is selfless. When you read these very practical things in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we see that love is sincere, it is sacrificial, and it is selfless. And when you think about those things, think about this. I think our family or anyone really close to us, anyone that would know us, we can smell fake sincerity from a mile away, can't we? There's people laughing over here. You could see, your kids, they're really good at smelling that, aren't they? Like we know fake sincerity. And so what would it look like to really drive home sincerity? Not like a one-time thing that we can kind of put on, but what if this was really what it looked like for us? Sacrificial. We know what it's like to be sacrificial in so many different ways. It says love doesn't demand its own way. That means sometimes we don't always get the way we want to because we're making sacrifices. We know, like I said, we know what it means to sacrifice things in so many different avenues. I was an assistant coach, a local high school hockey team a couple years ago, and we would tell our guys, you know what, on Friday nights, if we didn't have a game, like absolutely, go to the football games, go support go support everyone else in your school, but that means you're turning in early because we may have had a Saturday morning early skate or a game the next day, and it's like you're going home, and we know, like even at a high school level, I need to sacrifice this. I'm going to sacrifice this for a little while so that I can get somewhere else. I want to do these things. And they were good with it because they wanted to be great athletes. And they wanted to listen to what was going on. We know what it's like to sacrifice in so many other ways. But again, at home, when it comes to this idea of loving other people, especially those closest to us, sometimes we have a hard time figuring out what does that actually mean? What does that look like? Or maybe we know what it means. It's just difficult to do. And so is it on our radar? Love is sacrificial and it's selfless. It's not about me. Because if love is about me, then I'm definitely keeping score. I would walk around with a notebook and I'd be making notes, or I'd have my phone out with the notes app and you say something to me and I'm typing it in like, yeah, okay, no, keep going. That's great. But love keeps no record of wrongs. But if it were about me, then I would be keeping score. But it's not. It's selfless. Love is selfless. And sincerity and sacrifice and selflessness, when that plays itself out, we get to this point when we put those things in action, love as a definition serves. Love will serve one another. And so sincerity, selflessness, and sacrifice in action looks like love serving. And that's Jesus kind of turned this on its head. People were expecting grand things as Jesus entered the world, and he came humbly. He came very different than what was expected of him. He kind of flipped this, and all the way through his time here on earth, he flipped this mindset of saying, and said, whoever wants to become great among you, you must be your servant. Or you must be a servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave, the idea of servanthood. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This idea of serving is something Jesus modeled. He talked about. He lived for us to see, and it kind of flipped things on its head. The first shall be less. This idea that whoever wants to be great among you is going to serve the most. Now, serving, oftentimes we think of a task with it. We think of serving as a task, or as a task, and sometimes serving is fixing in our eyes, right? Like someone has a problem, I'll diagnose it in 5 seconds. I'll tell you what to do, and then boom, we're done. Like I served you so well, and I feel really good about it. That's not necessarily serving or a task. Some moms would say, I've changed 300 diapers today, and I don't want to talk about any more tasks. I want to talk about serving because that's real to them. And a couple of things, as an adult and as a parent, I found myself every time I talked to my parents apologizing for the way that I was. I'm like, oh, I get it now. I get it. So those tasks do not go unnoticed. What I'm talking about is not necessarily a task, but more of a posture, more of a position that we're taking on. So try to not think of a task, but try to think of more of a posture when it comes to serving. Because oftentimes we just go immediately to a task, and it's like, I'm tired. I have a lot of tasks, and I understand that. So what if we approach it this way? And serving is not always fixing, as I said, but serving sometimes just simply showing up. Serving is sometimes just being present, being available. One of the ways that we can serve, one of the best ways we can serve today in 2019 is to just listen. Just listen to people. I had this training this week. It was incredible, a lot of practical things. One of the things that we had to do was, I say had to do, and so I'm going to challenge you to do it too, because I was subjected to it. I want you to do it too. And so I can't make you do anything, but I just feel like I have a microphone. I'm going to say that. And so, but we had this assignment that we did in our training, and it was about listening, and we were paired up with someone, and we just had to talk. We weren't told how long for, but it ended up being 2 minutes. So we had to talk for 2 minutes, and the other person had to sit across from us, and then after the 2 minutes, they had to try to say back as many things as we said, and they had to maintain eye contact with us the entire time. Now, I don't know the last time you stared dead in the eyes at someone for 2 solid minutes, but it's creepy. Like, I've seen movies, and it usually doesn't go well for, like, people. Like, it was just weird. And I'm getting, like, nervous. I'm sweating when someone's looking at my eyes, like, too long. I'm like, do I have something, like, wrong? Like, what's wrong with, like, this is weird. It's weird. And so that's why I want you to do it. It'll be fun. And so it was very uncomfortable. But it was really, really cool. And I was thinking about, when was the last time that we had someone maybe listen to us? Or when was the last time we actually were listening? My oldest, Evie, she will call me out any day of the week on this. I'll be nodding or I'll say something back to her, and she goes, Daddy, you're not listening to me. I'm like, oh, yeah, I am. She's like, no, Daddy, you're on your phone. I'm like, I can't justify that. Like, yeah, you're right. You do not have my full attention. One of the best ways we can serve people right now is to put down a phone and just look at them and listen. And oftentimes we get in trouble because we're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know. Just be there. Just listen. It's one of the best ways we can come alongside someone and serve them right now. And so this attitude of servanthood, or this posture of servanthood, right? Sacrifice, selflessness, and this idea of being sincere leads us to servanthood. And what does this look like? How does this play out within our families? Well, it looks like this. A family willing to take on this posture, it looks like mutual submission. That's what it looks like. It looks like mutual submission. And we're going to talk about how that plays out in our worlds, within our families. And that idea is just kind of it just means deferment. It just means I'm going to defer to you. I'm going to consider your feelings. I'm not going to demand my own way all the time. I'm going to defer to how are you feeling about this? I'm going to put this, and what we're about to read is kind of a marriage passage, but it can be applicable to so many more relationships on a much broader sense. Actually, what we're about to read, this first verse we're going to read, is something that you maybe have heard these passages at weddings before too. This verse is one of the most misunderstood, misquoted, misused, whatever verse in the Bible. It's been used in a lot of hurtful and damaging ways for a very long time, and even today. And so I love talking about it. Isn't that weird? It's a weird verse, and it's a weird kind of passage, but I love talking about this. And the verse is, and it's a fun one, wives, submit to your husbands. Submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. Now, there is a challenge there to wives, but oftentimes we go, she's supposed to do everything. She's supposed to listen and listen and listen. Before we even talk about this, let's read a couple of verses down. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So Jesus gave everything of who he was, laid down his life for the sake of the church, took down all of our mistakes, all of our punishment, and took that to the cross. Husbands, how are we doing loving our wives in that kind of sense? I'm not making you feel bad. If I'll answer, not good. Do I love my wife? Absolutely. Am I living this out to a T? Can we be real? No, I'm not living this out to a T. I'm not perfect in this area at all. But the idea here and the key verse here is actually the first verse in this section, Ephesians 5:21, where it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, out of thankfulness, out of gratefulness, out of an understanding of what God has done for us by sending Jesus to come and rescue us, pay the penalty for all of our mistakes. Submit to one another. Now, I want you to be proud of me, so I'm going to let you know I took a couple of years of Greek in college. Hold for applause. No, you don't care, and I don't care either. I actually forgot just about all of it. But it's handy for stuff like this. In the Greek language, which the New Testament was written in, what happens oftentimes is there will be one verb, and if it's meant to imply in the coming passages or the coming text, they will leave out that verb, so you just borrow it from what was above. That makes sense. And so this verse here, I just want to tell you this verse here where it says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, there's actually not a verb written in that sentence. It's just implied from that first one where it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That means they just took that, and we're going to borrow that. That means everything underneath this in this passage is under this umbrella of what this means to submit to one another. Because we are so grateful and we have an understanding of how much God loves us, then we're going to have an approach where we're going to submit to one another. And then it gives challenges to each of us. So we're going to look at what this looks like as we play it out within our home, because submission, this idea of mutual submission will communicate something. It communicates that I am willing to leverage. I'm willing to leverage who I am for your betterment. I am willing to leverage my power, my influence, and my resources for you, to benefit you. That's what this communicates. That's what submission would communicate to the people. Again, spouses, but in a much broader context. I will leverage who I am for you. If you want to know, that's kind of the idea of submission, and that's kind of the perceived notion we want to have, is I am someone who's willing to leverage who I am, what I have, for your benefit. If you want to know if this is how maybe you are being perceived, there's another fun exercise I'm going to challenge you with, because I did it, and it was horrible. And so I'm going to ask you guys to do it too. It's really fun. And so if you really want to know how you come off, or what you communicate as a person, find someone you know and trust, go one-on-one, and ask them this question. What is your truthful protection around this conversation? What is your gut reaction when my name pops up on your phone when I text or call you? What is your gut reaction when you see my name pop up on your phone? You guys are doing better. A couple other services were like, oof, it was very loud. It's uncomfortable. But if you want to really know what you're communicating to other people, it's a great exercise. Maybe just think about it. You don't have to do it, but maybe just think about it. I did it. It was great. It was great. I promise you, it'll be awesome. But if you really want to know what you're communicating, this is what submission communicates. I am someone who is willing to leverage who I am for your betterment. That is what submission communicates. It also comes to a conclusion of something. Submission will conclude the fact that you and I are of no less value than the other. You are of no less value than me. I'm willing to leverage who I am for your benefit, and it concludes that you are of no less value to me. We may have different roles, we may have different responsibilities, we may have different work cycles, and this is a bridge. This conclusion right here is a bridge to when we get caught up in our feelings of feeling invaluable, feeling like we're not valued, feeling insignificant. Submission, when it concludes this, brings us out of our feelings and back into the facts. It brings us out of our feelings and back into truth. Saying, no. You're changing diapers all day and you're tired and you are no less value than I am. What you had a really hard day, you are of no less value than I. Jesus died for you too. And because of what he did for us, I'm going to submit. And I'm going to consider your feelings. I'm going to defer to you. I'm not going to demand my own way. I'm here for you. I am here to see how I can leverage myself for your benefit. You are of no less value than I am. And what does submission consider? Well, it considers this question. What can I do to help? It asks this question, what can I do to help? What if this was our approach? I mean, think of the question itself, but think of it more of as an approach. What if we asked this question? I know as a teenager, if I would have asked my parents this, my mom would have looked at me like she saw a ghost. Like this was clearly not my demeanor as a teenager. Like I said, I'm apologizing to my parents the further along I get. Like, oh my goodness. But what if we had this kind of mindset? What if this kind of question just came up at home? Later on today, tomorrow, what can I do to help? What if it was a question we asked our kids? What can I do to help? What if it was a question we asked our parents? What can I do to help? Because that communicates a couple of things. Again, it communicates, I'm here for you. I'm here to leverage who I am, what I have right now for your benefit. You are of value to me. And this isn't a one and done thing. Like you go home today and you go, you know what, they said at church, like I should do this. So, hey, what can I do to help? And she or he says nothing. And you're like, whew. All right, cool, did it. I feel great. Like I am the man. Like this is great. Like I feel really good about myself. Like I was so helpful in that moment because I said, like I meant it too. Like, but she said nothing. Okay, well then ask again tomorrow. And ask again the next day. If you have 4 kids like us at home, just ask again in 2 minutes because the answer will change. What can I do to help? What if that was our posture? What if that was our approach? What if that was how we went about things? Because here's what I know. We all kind of want, Amazon can get something to us at our doorstep in 2 minutes now? We all want something to be very quick. And maybe, I don't know you, I don't know your family, I don't know every one of you, but maybe you have walls built up with really strong relationships or really, close family members. Maybe there are walls built up. We want to know that, hey, if we're sincere in asking this question, if I try to serve, or if I try to be sincere and say, what can I do to help? And I help them, like I helped you out, I encouraged you the other day, but the wall is still there. And it's frustrating. Because you're like, I thought I knocked it down. Like I thought we were good. How many of you ever built Legos before? You built Legos before? Yeah, okay, all right. Don't act like you're too good for Legos. But I will say, we have been kind of shifting over, asking every holiday for magnet tiles, if you're a parent. They're less hurtful to step on, and so they're a lot of fun. And so, but my son will build his magnet tiles, and he'll build up like a big house for his cars. And then one of our kids will crawl over and knock the whole thing down right away. You know what that's like if you're a parent. The other one will slowly take one piece off at a time, just to kind of make it more painful for him, So you get the idea, though. What you're doing with this question, and keep my kids out of this, but what you're doing with this question is slowly maybe deconstructing a wall that was there. Because you may not knock down a wall the one time you show up to help, or the one time you offer yourself, the one time you don't try to maybe assume yourself over anyone else. You may not knock down a wall, but you may take a brick down. And this idea of submitting to one another, submission over time, is going to equal that love that we looked at in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. All those characteristics come from this idea of submission over time. That continually, have it be a sincere posture that we take. Not just asking one time today and I am done. It's a commitment. It's work. It's something that we strive for and say, this is what I want to do. Because over time, then we start to build that with our family members. We start to build that with the people that are closest to us. How do we sustain this? How do we actually take this from, I want to do this, and maybe I'll even ask this tonight when I get home. Maybe I'll ask this tomorrow. Maybe maybe I'll consider this. How do we sustain this? How do we go from being, one time I did really good for a day, and that, right? Because this is what we do. And I am guilty of it more than anyone else. We look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're like, all right, it says to be kind, so I'm gonna try real hard to be kind today. And then, you're really kind until that person at Starbucks doesn't hold the door open for you, and you're like, I hope your day's ruined, jerk. Right? It's just, no one else? I've never done that either. Forget it. Never happened. I didn't audibly say it. I just said it inside, right? So it's not as bad. No, okay, so no one else? Gosh, this is tough. How do we sustain this? How does this become something that we grow into? How does this become something that we're really recognizing? It comes from these verses in Romans chapter 5. That's where it comes from. Because it says this in verse 2 of Romans chapter 5. It says, because of our faith, Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand. I'd love for you to underline that or circle that. Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand. What that literally means is that we were over here. Maybe we were running from God. Maybe we were just kind of confused about God. Maybe we weren't sure about things. Maybe we had given up on God. Maybe we'd given up on the church. We've been burned before, whatever it is. Maybe we just weren't aware of what God has done for us or how much he loves us. But when we were in a position over here, it literally says we didn't earn our way to the other side, but God picked us up, brought us over here, and has now set us down and placed us in a position of undeserved privilege. That's what it means. He came to rescue us. He came to offer us hope when maybe we felt hopeless. And he literally placed us into a position over here where now confidently and joyfully we look forward to sharing God's glory. That means forever in heaven, and that means here right now today with the people around us that we love most. He has put us in this position. So this isn't about me learning more. This isn't about me being tough. This isn't about me getting it all together. This is about me understanding that first I needed a rescuer. First I needed help with this because I've made mistakes too. And it says just a few verses later, when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. I love that it says, now most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though some might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. Again, while we were confused, while we were running, while we were rebelling, while we were in the mess maybe that our family is in right now. While we were in that spot, what was true 2,000 years ago is true for us today as well. Jesus came to pay the punishment, the penalty for all of our mistakes, and to offer us that hope. That doesn't mean a light switch turns on and all of your family problems go away, but that means you have hope and peace in your heart that goes beyond understanding, and we have something to go forward with. This isn't about us powering up. This is about us taking a posture that Jesus showed when he leveraged every bit of who he was, showed us our value in God's eyes, and met our greatest need when we needed him most. And out of that is where we jump into this, and that is what is sustainable. Because if we keep trying and white knuckle this thing, it's not going to work. It will not work. But this posture comes out of the overflow of what God has given us and done for us. I'd love to pray for you right now. God, we thank you so much for your love. We thank you so much for who you are, for everything you've done for us. God, I pray for everyone in the room that your love would be known in our hearts, that we would leave today having peace and having hope. God, I don't know every situation in the room. I don't know every family dynamic. I don't know what's going on, but God, I do believe that every one of us are here not by an accident today, and that today we would choose that kind of peace in our hearts. And that out of that, you would be able to sustain us to be people that take on a posture, to take on sincerity, to take on selflessness, to take on sacrifice for those that we care about most. That over time, we build this kind of love within our families. Maybe you're in the room today and maybe you've never had a moment where you've said, yes, you know what, I do believe this, and maybe I've never heard about Jesus, or maybe I'm kind of at my end of the rope right now, but I want that kind of peace. I want that kind of hope in my heart. I want to know that I am forever in heaven with Jesus when I pass on this earth. Maybe you want to pray a prayer like this. If you're willing to say, I want Jesus to be the Lord of my life, I want to follow him. I want the way I've been going hasn't necessarily been working, or the fact that I don't know where I'm going to go when I pass away. This is how you know. If you want to pray a prayer like this, you can repeat quietly after me within your own heart. You say something like, God, I know I'm not perfect. I know I make mistakes. I know that's called sin. I know that sin has separated me from you. But I really do believe, God, that you sent Jesus. He lived a perfect life. He took all of my mistakes and he paid the penalty for them by dying on the cross. And God, I believe that you raised him from the dead, that you have all authority to say that I am forgiven. And God, I want to know that forgiveness right now. Please forgive me for the mistakes I've made. Come into my life, come into my heart. Help make me new. Give me peace and hope in my heart that goes beyond any understanding or anything I've ever felt before. God, help me to live for you, to take another step closer to you today and every day. Be the leader, the Lord of my life as I try to love those who are closest to me. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.